Ladies and gentlemen, I am very glad to be here tonight to take part in the Wednesday social. And also rather relieved because I almost didn't make it. And for once, that wasn't because of Brussels traffic. The only reason I'm here is because of Frederick and Mathilde Bayer, and thousands of people like those two. People who didn't give up in 1886, when the Danish Parliament rejected Frederick's bill to give women the vote in Denmark. But people kept campaigning for 30 years through groups like Mathilde's Danish Women's Association, until women got the right to vote and stand for election in 1915. Without those people, I would never have had a chance to stand for Parliament. I wouldn't have been nominated as European Commissioner, and I certainly wouldn't be here with you today. And that goes for a lot of you as well. If it weren't for the women and occasional men before us, we wouldn't be here. So today, International Women's Day, it's an especially meaningful time for me to be here with you. Because I know that 100 years ago in Europe, and even today, in much of the world, women just don't have that chance. The fact is that it has probably never been better. There's probably never been a better place to live in Europe than today, especially if you're a woman. There's never been a time when a young woman starting out had so much opportunity to shape her life. And where my generation of women were doing things for the first time, the next generation can look for the models, the role models in every walk of life. If she wants to be a politician, many European countries, they can offer role models as prime ministers or presidents. If she wants to start a business, she can be inspired by the brilliant and determined women who are the finalists just tonight as we speak at the EU Prize for Women Innovators. The award ceremony is going on at the European Parliament right now. If she wants to have a family, as well as an intense work-life career, which after all is a thing that men always have had, family and career, well, she'll find women who knows how to make it work. But she will also find men who are willing to share the family responsibilities. Simone de Beauvoir, she wrote in The Second Sex that man is defined as a human being and a woman as a female. Whenever she behaves as a human being, she is set to imitate the male. Well, I do think that in Europe today, we have come further than ever before in treating women and men alike as human beings, as equals. When you put it that way, it may seem obvious as a given. And yet, for most of history, women have had to fight to be treated like human beings. They've had to struggle to be themselves, and not just someone's daughter, someone's wife, someone's mother. In decades, they have been like blocks of marble that someone could carve out a shape that suited their fancy. Some carved an object of desire, others shaped objects of veneration, and for long, long periods of time, no one asked women what form, what shape they themselves would want to take. And maybe women didn't even ask themselves, what do I want to be? Yet some did. Our great-grandmothers, they fought for the right to vote. People said, come on, their husbands can speak for them. In my home country, they even said, why give the husband 2 votes? Our grandmothers, they demanded their own legal existence, not to be treated by the law as children in care of their husbands, as they were in much of Europe. People said, oh, but their husbands can already defend their interests. I think it was not until 1978 that women in Denmark got their own tax bill. They even had to fight to pay their taxes. I can tell you in my line of work, I very often meet the opposite. Our mothers, they fought for equal pay. And people said, oh, but their husbands are the real breadwinners anyway. Why bother? They heard this, and they heard more. And yet, they went on fighting. Because they were looking for something that was much more simple. They wanted to be treated as equal human beings in their own right. They wanted it to be known that women's rights are human rights. I think that's something that every European can understand. Because fairness and equality, well, they are a fundamental part of who we are. The European Union was born from the ashes of a terrible war. And the lessons learned, they are still with us today. Someone said that war is nothing but a generation away. I think that the scary thing is that as long as peace is the responsibility of humans, it's not a given. We learned the lesson. We know that every human being deserves the same respect, the same right, the same freedom. And we are determined that no one should be treated as a second-class citizen. And that is why in Europe we so strongly insist on the rule of law. Because without our judges, without our courts, well, what are the rights worth if you do not have the right to a fair hearing? This is also why Europeans, they ask and demand of their leaders to face up to climate change. They don't accept that we should leave the planet to our children in a way that can't support them. And as I said, these values, I see them every day in my line of work. Europeans do not believe that some companies should have the selective advantage not to pay their fair share of taxes. They don't see why some should get favors not available to everyone. And obviously they expect us to make sure that it happens. They do expect the rule of law, thus the law is enforced. And the same conviction that everyone deserves a fair chance is why gender equality matters so much to Europeans. Of course, we still have a long way to go. What matters is that we never stop doing what we can to make our societies just that little bit fairer each and every time we take action, because then we make people's life a little bit better. And every moment in the women's fight for equality, well, they could have asked themselves, why do I bother? I could do something else. I could occupy myself with photos of food on Snapchat. I could be on my couch and watching series on Netflix. I could just do my job and try to get promoted. Why do I bother when so much is still left undone? Back then, I am absolutely certain that they asked themselves the question, why am I campaigning for my right to vote when my husband still controls my property? Why bother? Why am I fighting for the right to work when I get paid half as much as any man doing the same job? But they knew back then that every victory, every little step forward was in the right direction, and that they made a real difference in women's life. And they had the faith that future generations would carry on their work until all those little victories added up to equal opportunities for women. Looking around, it is clear to see that their optimism was justified. Their faith was justified. Their sacrifices were justified. And our responsibility is to make sure that we do not break that chain, that we continue. We need to ask ourselves why, when women have the right to equal pay for equal work, that women in Europe is still paid 1/6 less than men. We need to ask ourselves, when women now have had the right to stand up for election for 100 years, for a century, that less than a third of the members of European national parliaments are women. We need to ask ourselves why, more than a century after Maria Sklodowska-Curie won the Nobel Prize in Physics, that only 16 other women has won the prize for physics, chemistry, or medicine. And perhaps, and that may be even more urgent, we need to ask ourselves why now, when women are no longer controlled by their husbands and even pay tax, why is it that more than 1/5 of European women have suffered physical or sexual violence from their partners? To get to those questions and to answer them, we need to dig much deeper than to rules and regulations. We have to look into the ways that inequality is built into things that we do, men as well as women. Catherine Kaufman, she's a professor at Howard University. She has looked into something that could seem quite banal, as how do men and women do multiple choice tests? Because multiple choice testing is a thing that we do quite a lot in order to score, in order to do admissions, in order to do a number of different things. What she found was that when men don't know the answer, it happens. They are more willing to guess. And, of course, sometimes they get it right. Well, they get a higher score as a result, because they're much more prone to guessing. When women are not sure of the answer, they stay quiet, just as they've been taught to do for centuries. Changing isn't easy. We'll face the same questions that women have faced in every step of this fight for equality. Don't you have enough rights already? Shouldn't we be a bit more modest? Shouldn't we recognize that men also have problems don't you just make everyone uncomfortable? Well, I don't think there's any room for modesty when you insist on being treated as a human being. And anyone who doubts whether women are ready for that fight just haven't been following close enough. On January 20th, I got together with thousands of people, women and men, here in Brussels to lit candles in the name of equal rights for everyone. The same weekend, millions of women around the world marched in defense of their rights. They weren't there to negotiate away their rights in return for a quiet life. They were there to insist on being treated as equals, not as the same, not as a copy, not as imitating, but as equals. Because once the spirit of equality has taken root in a society, it can never be removed unless it withers away. The women of the world understand that, and they won't give up the rights they won. And the good thing is that we all have their inspiration, men as well as women, because this is a common fight for men as well as women to be human beings. And on that note, happy Women's Day, everyone. Thank you.